Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Day Everyday podcast, where we aim to spotlight exemplary activists, policymakers, and changemakers in the field of sustainability and climate change. I'm your host, Aryan Doshi, and today we are so lucky to have with us Lani. Lani is a former community leader at Powerful Learning Practice, an active member and volunteer at the Third Act, and is a teacher. Lani, it is so amazing to have you with us today.
Oh, I'm actually so delighted to be able to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I guess maybe to get started, can you just tell our audience a bit about how you got involved in the climate movement and how you came to learn more about this field?
It's just been recently. My we in third act we call our second act when we have a career um, was totally about being an advocate for public education, and I was a K-12 educator in a variety of settings. I was blessed to work with all kinds of young people,
Yeah.
but in urban settings, in suburban settings, in independent schools. And during that time, we discovered together the what amazing things and horizons that technology opened.
Yeah.
And this would have been long before many of your listeners probably are familiar. I started then helping teachers understand about using technology in the classroom.
Wow.
Back before the World Wide Web, when there was Telnet and Gopher, and that was it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when I retired and I worked in a lot of on-spotlight
Yeah.
spaces, Powerful Learning Practice was one, led some communities of practice. There was a significant time in there when my beloved Gus' health was declining. And so he became my primary focus. And I knew about the environment. I was concerned. I'd never, ever been an activist. And I learned about Third Act. And the reason I joined, first of all, was because of their working principles. Third Act's a unique organization that has a set of working principles that grounds everything that we do. And that drew me in. The other thing that drew me in, very honestly, was not the climate side. The Third Act focuses on both climate and democracy because they see them as being intricately connected.
Yeah.
And my focus was my dismay at what was happening with our democracy.
That's for sure.
And it was I did a whole lot of learning and listening. Third Act is a learning organization. It really does. It provides all kinds of resources. And the more I learned, the more I recognized that this was a place where I needed to bring, we call it bringing gifts and talents because everybody has different ones.
Yeah.
Maybe my background in technology would be a way to support the movement.
Yeah.
And it came out, I guess I believe in serendipity a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, and not just in luck, but when you're open to possibilities, all kinds of stuff happen. And so here I am.
Yeah, no, I think that story is so inspirational, the way you're using technology to sort of help individuals as they sort of try and join this movement. I guess that sort of brings me to my next question as well, which I know you being an educator, do you sort of envision climate and democracy as being more involved parts of the curriculum like in the future in schools?
I wish that they were.
Yeah.
I'm in Northeast Ohio. That doesn't happen in Northeast Ohio or in Ohio now at the moment. In many states, actually, there are only, I think, 2 states that actually have mandates for climate in their curriculum.
Wow.
New Jersey's one, I think Vermont's the other.
Wow.
I know that California's working on stuff like that. And that, to me, that's really, really problematic. And in the democracy piece, I think there always needs to be a place for young people to learn how to think critically.
Yeah.
Not just to be told exactly this is what you should, this is it, this is what you believe.
Yeah.
A place where young people can learn to think critically and to understand how our government was initially founded,
Mhm.
the basis for the democracy, and it as an idea,
Yeah.
and how it's always unfolding, and how important it is for them to be involved. And this comes from someone who, when I was your age, ended up after college with a degree in American government, okay, in American history. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think that sort of background that you were talking about, intertwining democracy with climate, is so important, especially when you think about, the founding of our country, and how we got to the democracy that we've got to today, because I think oftentimes people don't really associate, like you were saying, the policy side of things with climate. But oftentimes you need policy, and you need, people who are willing to come together and do what's right in order to make the climate movement, feasible for the future. I guess that sort of brings me to my next question as well, which is, I know you're talking about like youth and teaching them the importance of preserving democracy. How do we sort of convey the message to youth as well, that just as one person, you can also make a difference? I know like Third Act's sort of mission is also to like create this movement, but how do we sort of convey this idea that even you as one person, you can like make a difference when we're talking about, climate and the problem itself?
Years and years ago, when Bill McKibben founded 350.org, they had a huge global day.
Wow.
And he often talks about the one picture that stands in his mind from that entire day
Mhm.
was somebody in one of the Middle East countries who had to go through all kinds of challenges to be
Mhm.
able to get to the place where she wanted to make her statement.
Yeah.
And she ended up alone with a banner.
Mhm.
And he talks about often the power of one.
Yeah.
When we had our third act had our 3-2-1-2-3 day of action in March of 23. I was active in the educators group then,
Yeah.
and we wanted to be able to pull in third actors who didn't have maybe mobility or opportunities to get out
Mhm.
of their homes and be out
Yeah.
in the streets. And we had third act educators had a teaching called The Power of One, and all the individual things you can do as an individual.
Yeah.
And those are now listed on Third Act's websites. If
Wow.
people go to Third Act and look under actions, there's letter writing, there's postcard writing, there's
Yeah.
phone making, there's letters to the editor about public utility commissions and decisions that
Yeah.
they're making. There's meeting with bank managers and
Mhm.
asking those banks to stop funding fossil fuel expansion. And
Mhm.
those are all individual activities
Yeah.
people take. And at the same time, Bill McKibben also says that if you ask what the most important thing you can do, even in this country as an individual, it's to join a movement.
Yeah.
Because when
True.
you're part of a movement, that the voices are amplified. It can
Mhm.
make
Make a difference. Yeah, no, I think that message resonates so much, because I think even when we think about how can one individual make an impact, even if you think about maybe just one day going to the coffee store, like you bring a thermos instead of using a plastic cup. If you just like multiply that, 365 cups a year to the billions and billions of people around the world, that's making an impact. Conserving energy in the house, if you scale that across everyone, that's making an impact. But I think, like you're talking about, the movement aspect of it is, I think, something also really unique about the climate problem, because I think it requires the sense of like togetherness, right? And only with
Mhm.
this togetherness are we going to achieve change. And so that's sort of like a unique problem that we haven't really seen before. And so I think there definitely is the stigma around climate change, and rightfully so, because it is having a detrimental impact on our planet. But how do you think we can also sort of shape this to be about how climate change requires a togetherness, and that togetherness and sorts of unity that can also be really powerful, and sort of express that as well?
I think it's about inviting people in.
Mhm.
And I think it's about focusing on values,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody, no matter who they are, loves our planet.
Yeah.
The skiers love it in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
and now often they can't ski as much.
Yeah.
The fishermen love it for fishing season, and now many of our lakes are there. The ecology is being destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, farmers,
Mm-hmm.
farmers in many areas are having so many challenges now and
The
having to change.
crop. Yeah.
And it's because we share a common value. We all love this planet, and
Yeah.
we all want to take care of our families.
Yeah.
And so I think coming together and focusing on what we share and
Mm-hmm.
what's important to us,
Yeah.
and then providing opportunities for people to act. You know, those of us over 60 in third act, many of the 70,000 volunteers hadn't spent a lot of time with
Yeah.
technology.
Wow.
The work that they did when they were younger was
Mm-hmm.
all face to face.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another way to help with togetherness, because I will tell you, when we had that day of action in March of 23,
Yeah.
um, I traveled 40 miles into Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
I had never, ever been on the streets with a sign before. And for
Wow.
the first time in 76 years,
Wow.
okay, I was out in front of a Chase Bank with a group of people who shared my same values. I didn't know all of them, but it was like all of a sudden there was this feeling of camaraderie and
Yeah.
togetherness that was that was something that I'll never forget.
Wow. No, that's amazing. I think, yeah, togetherness is really important. I guess, talking about third act and how they sort of foster that, how do you sort of sort of encourage or give advice to other people who want to be a part of other organizations as well? Like, how can they channel, I guess, third act's like functionality, like how they host classes, how they host these rallies, these campaigns, and like what goes on behind the scenes to sort of make that happen? Because oftentimes when you're bringing together a movement, there's so much work behind the scenes that you never see. And so how do you sort of, express that and allow other people to also create their own movements as well?
Mhm. I can tell you in third act, there's a campaigns team,
Yeah.
and they're the ones that are responsible for the campaigns and setting up all the work that goes into them. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's an organizing team, and that's the team that I support. And third act organizes around what we call working groups.
Mm-hmm.
And there are state working groups based on geography, and
Mm-hmm.
there are affinity groups for educators, for faith, for
Mm-hmm.
lawyers, for
Yeah.
creatives.
Mm-hmm.
And those groups get together and they focus on national third act nationals
Yeah.
campaign,
Mm-hmm.
and they also do it through their local lens,
Yeah.
because things are different in California than they are
For
in
sure.
Ohio or Michigan
Yeah.
or Georgia. Right now, Georgia, I've been working with a group of wonderful Georgians,
Wow.
and I I think then the key becomes to somebody who joins a movement and wants to help grow it is first understand that everybody brings unique gifts and talents.
For sure.
And in any movement, being inclusive and welcoming those is
Mhm.
really critical.
Yeah.
And understanding that some folks may not be able to do one thing, but
For
they may
sure.
be good or want to do something else. And it's everybody working together for the same goals.
Mhm.
And I can tell you, when I'm encouraged to talk to new third actors, I I think back on my own experience. And the first thing was I listened a lot, and
Yeah.
I listened and I learned, and I listened and I learned, and I
Mhm.
continue to do that. Okay. And then people need to follow their hearts,
For sure.
because this to me, and to all of third act, it it needs to be approached with joy
Mhm.
and with hope.
Yeah.
As terrible as things might seem on a daily basis, if we take that approach, and I believe we come together, and then people raise their voices, and most importantly, form coalitions,
Yeah.
so that, for example, those of us in our third act, we really would love to be there for younger activists. Okay, we'd like to show up and not be in charge.
Yeah,
Um, we'd like to think that maybe we have a little bit of wisdom that we could offer.
for sure,
Okay,
definitely.
we've got still some structural power. Bill McKibben talks about how those of us over 60 have over 70% of all the wealth in this country. Okay, so we've got some structural power, and we've had some experience, so we kind of know. Young people have new ideas,
Mhm.
things that look far beyond perhaps what we would ever envision, but
Yeah.
we really like to be there to um, to support young
Big gap,
people.
yeah. No, I think what you were saying there at the end also about how like sort of bridging this gap between older and younger generations. I think that's another unique aspect that climate change brings is that it's very much this intergenerational movement, right? I think oftentimes there's this idea that, young activists are going to work with like the younger people and older activists will likely lean towards the older people. But how do we sort of um like broaden or expand this message that when we're thinking about climate change, it really is all about younger generations working with older generations and like this collective need and collective good, just sort of like expanding that view of it being really an intergenerational movement more than anything.
Yeah, because it's all about the future.
Yeah.
Um, during Summer of Heat Week, just this July 10th, okay, that's the one coming up. But there was a demonstration just 2 weeks ago in New York City for Summer of Heat. Third Act elders were there, and
Wow.
almost all of them carried signs on the front of them that said, "We are doing this for our grandchildren," and they had pictures of the
Wow.
grandchildren. Sign.
That's
And
amazing.
that's what we talk. What we always talk about our why, and everybody is there, not for us, but for young people and for the grandchildren. When I have the privilege and the honor to do what they call welcome to third act calls. And any of your listeners would be welcome at those calls. They're every other Monday night. They're on third
Wow.
act events
Yeah.
page where we welcome new folks and tell them about third act. And on one of the very first calls, there was a 92-year-old gentleman, a wonderful man.
Wow.
He had just moved from Texas to be near his children so they could help take care of them in the Northwest. And we were talking about, why are you here? And he said, because I just want to go out right. I don't think I'll ever forget that. And that's why I think when we all realize that this isn't about what we did but it's all about the world that we want to leave for those that come.
Yeah. No, I think, no, wow. I mean, I think that's just such a beautiful and like moving message as well. I mean, I don't think people often, think about that when they're thinking about climate and have that perspective that you were talking about. But I think it really is in many ways just like you were saying, all about, listening and just listening to the people, the world around you. And I think that goal that you were talking about, I mean, I just don't know how can we sort of convey that that's such a pure message to, as many people as possible. Because I really do think, like you were saying, it is all about creating that movement. But I think oftentimes when we look at the media and even politicians today, I feel in many ways they don't think about like the people of today and right now, right? It's oftentimes like, we're living in California. We still have sunlight, we still have thankfully water, we still have all these resources. And so the thought of climate never really occurs to them. And then they sort of view it as not being real or not being fake. But how do we sort of make them realize that, like you were saying, there is a farmer out there who's being impacted, right? There is a worker out there who is being impacted. And while we may not be able to see it, that is still happening. People aren't able to get the crops or nourishment that they can. And so I think it's also about focusing on the people of today and right now, but how do we get the media and politicians to sort of sway that way as well and sort of understand that pure message that you sort of left me with there?
Well, I guess that's not an easy question to answer, right? Given the state of affairs of American democracy. However, I will say, um, you know, back in January, it looked like the United States was going to approve permitting of, dozens of more liquefied natural gas terminals along the Gulf Coast. And Bill McKibben came to Third Act and he said, we cannot let this happen. We have got to support the climate activists in the Gulf. And there's ways that third actors can do it. And one of those was writing handwritten letters. I can't begin to tell you how many thousands of handwritten letters the Secretary of the Interior got from third actors about how they should change the permitting. And then Third Act decided we're all going to go to DC in February and have a 3-day demonstration in front of the Department of the Interior to let people know they planned. We had all kinds of nonviolent direct action webinars. People ready to go. They were flying from California. You know what happened?
Wow.
The president paused the permitting of liquefied natural gas terminals until the guidelines for those permits were updated.
Wow.
And we didn't have our last nonviolent direct action webinar before the action. Celebration. Bill says the best nonviolent direct actions are the ones you don't have to have. Rosetta Ozain from the Gulf came up and celebrated with us via webinar. And I think when you can see the little bits and pieces and you know, okay, there's just that little bit of crack. That's what we kind of need to keep moving. And Rebecca Solnit is quite a writer and an author. She's also on the Third Act Advisory Council. She wrote a book called Hope in the Dark. Okay. And is it all right if I read you one of her quotes about hope?
Sure. Absolutely.
To me, the grounds for hope are simply that we don't know what will happen next, and that the unlikely and the unimaginable transpire quite regularly, and that the unofficial history of the world shows that dedicated individuals and popular movements can shape history and have, though how and when we might win and how long it takes is not predictable.
Wow. It's so beautiful because I think when you participate in climate as well, right? Or you participate in these movements, oftentimes you do it, but you don't know the outcome is going to be, right? You go in there, and I think it has to sort of stem from an innate sense of goodness and wanting to make a change, because oftentimes, there's not necessarily going to be like a one-to-one, what I put into it, I'm going to get a result out of it, right? You just have to do it like with your heart and soul in it. And I think that's sort of like maybe another reason why some people don't believe in it as such or don't want to pursue it, is because they see the field of climate, but then they're like, okay, how am I going to make like a profit or sort of like a profit around working in this field? Because they look at, energy sources like fossil fuels, and they're like, well, that's much cheaper, for example, than moving to other sources like, solar, wind, and hydro, right? And so I think oftentimes people also come in there with this idea of how can I profit off it, and what's the best monetary gain for me, rather than looking at it from the environment as well. And how do we sort of change that sort of notion that when we're looking in the field of sustainability, it shouldn't really be about, monetary or not, right? It's all about protecting the environment and protecting what we have. But I think many times there's often this sort of correlation that we have to go with what's cheaper, and being sustainable isn't cheaper. And so then people sort of stray away from that and maybe don't really acknowledge its presence. They don't see that one-to-one gain that they can get. And so how do we sort of change that notion, right? And sort of say that when we're thinking about environment, when we're thinking about sustainability, it doesn't need to be like that. It should just be you wanting to have that impact from within.
Yeah. And there's you're talking to the wrong person to be able to cite statistics to you. But I know that there's been a big decline in the cost of solar and renewable energy. And I wish I had that for you so that I could share that with you.
Yeah.
But I think what makes the difference is conversations. And I don't know if you're familiar with Catherine Hayhoe. She's a climate scientist. She
Wow.
was originally Canadian. She's now in Texas.
Yeah.
She does a lot of work in Texas, but across the country. And she talks a lot about that, about having conversations. Just in term, I mentioned about finding sharing values, what's important to everybody,
Yeah.
and just starting a conversation with somebody and talking about, yeah, you're working in the forest these days. This happened up in Third Act, New Hampshire. They had these beautiful conversations with all different kinds of workers in New Hampshire. And they talked to a forest worker. And he said, he said, we've lost our moose population. And it's because of climate. And
Wow.
it's a sad, sad thing to be. And they talked to somebody else in the tourist industry. And that person said, this was all in New Hampshire. Wow, this is it. Everything has changed. Flooding that we didn't used to have, now we have, and we have to be able to deal with.
Yeah.
They talked to a farmer, and an everyday farmer he was an amazing man. And he said, you have no idea how I've had to change the way I go about things.
Yeah.
And the more people that understand that and understand you're dependent on me for perhaps your milk,
Yeah.
or perhaps if it was a farm where they raise cattle for your beef, if you're a meat eater, these kinds of things are going to get more and more expensive, or they're not going to be as available because of all of this. And I think with the more conversations we have with people, the more people then are going to begin to stand up and raise their voices. And that's what's going to change. Because then they're going to see that when they vote, they're going to want to know, where do you stand on climate? Are you going to support our climate?
Yeah.
And end up saying to folks, if you can't move to this position, then I can't vote for you.
For sure. Yeah, and I think what you were saying at the end there about the farmers, I think when we're thinking about climate and sustainability, when we're looking at like the food we eat, people often sometimes forget the source, right, where it came from. And so they don't think about that farmer who's working oftentimes so much longer hours from dawn to dusk in the fields and helping to create that food. They don't think about that. And I think farmers are probably one of the most um important contributors to creating a sustainable world and continuously providing that food source. So I think, what you said there at the end was really amazing. I mean, I guess, do you just have like any like advice for people as well? Like maybe like last advice, how do people sort of just come in and really use their background knowledge to help create a movement? I think oftentimes when you're sort of joining into this climate movement, it's about taking your perspectives, right, merging them with other people and coming out to have um this bigger consensus, this bigger, more um uniform and unanimous viewpoint. So I guess, do you just have maybe like any like last thoughts on that in terms of when reviewing climate and when reviewing sustainability?
Thinking about forming a movement, then
Yeah.
I would say to lean on somebody who's done it before.
Yeah.
The staff at Third Act have hundreds of years of organizing experience.
Yeah.
And the staff's very small, Third Act. There may be between 12 and 13 people.
Yeah.
There are climate scientists on the staff. There are organizers on the staff. And of course, there's a big Digicoms group too, because everything's done so much digitally. But to lean on folks that have done it before in a movement that's experienced some success. There and to rely on relational organizing.
Yeah.
Relational organizing, and that's something that we talk a lot about in Third Act, that we dearly, dearly believe in. That relationships are what pull people together.
For
that you
sure.
take time to talk to people one to one.
Yeah.
Like you and I are talking. When I first joined the educators working group, my job was to greet every single person who signed up to join educators. And over the course of 10 months, I must have had over 110 Zoom calls with people who just wanted to know, what's this about? Do I want to join you? And I will tell you that the people who participated in those Zoom calls,
Yeah.
they were much more likely to come in and be
Yeah.
active
For
than
sure.
those of it who didn't. And as we continue to maintain and grow Third Act,
Yeah.
often have you had a one-to-one? Have you talked about this with somebody else? How well do you know this person? What do you know about them? Because when we, especially when stuff's being done
Yeah.
digitally now, out of necessity, and for a movement for climate, it
For
can't
sure.
just be totally local.
Yeah.
In an online spaces, the relationships are the glue for the trust that's needed to be able to maintain and sustain a movement. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, that's just so amazing. I think what you were saying there at the end too, right, in terms of, last thoughts is if we're able to sort of use right technology to sort of bridge everyone. I think bridge communities, bridge underrepresented groups, bridge people who oftentimes they don't have a voice, and just bring them together into this collective system, and then use technology platforms as a way of broadcasting this message, reaching as many people as possible. Then I think that's probably the way to go. So I mean, this that was just amazing message. I guess, do you have any sort of last words maybe like on the podcast you want to say?
Well, I totally want to thank you because I'm so humbled to
No,
be
no.
here.
Thank you so much for
And you know
coming.
something I just thought of, and that's too when you're forming a movement, and this is something that Third Act does all the time,
Yeah,
is instead of always saying to people, come join us,
yeah,
go out and we say, oh, you're doing this work here now. We'll show up for you. We'll
yeah,
support you. Because when people know that you're willing to support them, then
yeah,
often there's reciprocity.
yeah.
Okay. They want to come back and they want to
Yeah.
support you.
Yeah, I
But
think that was an amazing word, right? Creating that mutual sense of support between you and them. And I think that sort of goes back to, I think, Third Act's mission. I think it's like a humbling mission as well, right? Like the third act, like the legacy you want to leave behind, right? And so I think that's just it's such an amazing and an important way to think about the climate and creating a better world really for future generations. But I mean, yeah, thank you so much, Lani, for joining me on the podcast. Thank you so much to everyone who's watching. And yeah, with that, I'll see you guys on the next episode of Earth Day Every Day. Thank you so much.